supervisor, and I am here to share my knowledge with you. With the help of the other co founder of the Institute, Tanya Johnson, who will be joining us in the next half an hour. So, we decided to do this, is I think our fifth free webinar that we have put on for the public. And this is really something that's near and dear to our hearts, that really under the Institute is information that is based on neuroscience and interpersonal biology. It's really a grounding theory of any of the mental health interventions that we recommend at the Institute. So we thought, what better gift we can give entering 2022 than a webinar really focused on resiliency, cultivating understanding in our children, and seeing our children in a different way. One of the biggest reasons parents often struggle with their children's behavior is because their expectations just really aren't aligned with where their child is at in terms of their brain development. And so whenever we consider how we're responding to our children, what our expectations are, what milestones they're hitting, we always want to keep that, if we can, in kind of the background, because that will hopefully, when you see, like we say in our other courses, if you can see your child in a different way, you'll respond to them in a different way. And then maybe it will circumvent some frustration that you're having with your child. And it can give, you'll end up giving them the grace to just to be who they are in their own time and place, and to give yourself grace when things just aren't working the way that you hoped they would. So again, Tanya Johnson will be joining me shortly, but I am going to kick this off for the first half of the presentation. So when we think of caretaking, this doesn't even just mean parenting. I think that's anytime we are taking care of a child, we want to think about the sequence in which the child develops. And I think we don't want to see children as little adults, because they aren't. And they're very vulnerable neurologically. And the brain takes a really long time to develop. So we're talking actually as long as 32 for your brain to be fully developed, 32. And because of this, kids need a lot of space, and adults even need a lot of space. So let's look at the order in which this happens, that the brain develops, and in which parts happen first and which parts take a lot longer, which would explain a lot of issues parents have with their kids. So the first thing to know is the brain is very much like a muscle, that it grows based on what is used. So it's based on use-dependent development. So it's like if you go to the gym and you only exercise your legs and just do leg day, your legs are going to be very strong, but your upper body's going to be very weak. So one of our jobs of parenting is ensuring as often as we can to exercise all the parts of the brain. Now, this doesn't mean you need to stick your 1-year-old in preschool. It's just giving your child ample sensory experiences, and especially positive emotional experiences and attachment experiences, and giving space for the brain to catch up in terms of the rest of its development. The other thing what happens is the brain will develop from the bottom up. So the first thing that develops when you're born is your brain stem, which is at the bottom. It's the red here in the photo, the reptilian complex. But really that just means it's your central nervous system. The brain stem is at the bottom of the brain, attached to the spinal cord. And this is really all about your autonomic nervous system. So the stuff you don't have to think about, your heart beating, your immune system functioning, the blinking, swallowing, those kinds of things. They're pretty much intact from the time when we are born. I would say the brain stem is based in the body. So that is it's like the body brain. And then what happens next is we have the limbic system, which is a really easy way to remember it, is your emotional brain. The emotional brain starts to come online within a few months, so to speak, of being born, and it's typically done developing around 7 to 8 years old. So, I mean, you can see why early childhood, it's very important that we really foster emotions and empathy
and attachments, and we want to, which we'll talk more about, is we don't want to negatively impact this area, because that emotional brain works hand in hand with the brain stem. Remember, that's that reptilian brain that you see in this photo here. And then what happens? So your emotional brain is the second, and the third part to develop is what we would call the cortical brain or the neocortex. Some people call it the prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the cortical brain. And I like to think of that as really the thinking brain. So you have the bottom is the body brain, and then you have the emotional brain, and then or relationship brain too. And then you have the last to develop is the thinking brain. And this part of the brain is really about planning ahead, reflective thinking, impulse control, emotion regulation. For teachers, it's all about, the term executive functioning. It's really the part of your child's brain that is involved in learning and sophisticated thinking. And it's quite unique to human beings in how large ours is compared to other mammals. And when we're talking about birds and reptiles, they don't even have this functioning. So that thinking brain is what all parents want their children to be well, to have their child have a very well developed thinking brain. But unfortunately, this part of the brain doesn't really start to really develop those neurocenters, so to speak, until kids are about 5 to 7 years of age, and it's not done developing until they're close to 30 years of age. So that would make a lot of sense why children in preschool and toddlers and infants have a really hard time with controlling their emotions, about making good choices, about thinking about what they did wrong. They don't have those reflective capacities in the way that older children do or teenagers do. They have a hard time with regulating what goes on in their body and regulating what goes on within their emotions. So, of course, kids are more likely before, especially before the age of 5, to be mostly in their feeling brain, their emotional brain, and their body brain. So they're in their limbic system and their brain stem most of the time. And what's so that's kind of the review. So just what I want you to pick up from that is to give your child grace that that part of the brain that's involved again in those that logical piece, emotion regulation, impulse control, is very, very poorly developed and doesn't even start to form till they're in grade school, and then isn't done developing till they're into their late 20s. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that get in the way with that shortly. I first want to talk a little bit about neuroplasticity. So, as we're talking about like the parenting with the brain in mind, whether we're talking about the thinking brain, the feeling brain, or the body brain, what you need to know is the brain can change at any time in our life cycle. Now, it changes a lot easier before the age of 5. So I always say, like, working with a child's brain before 5 is like working with Play-Doh. If you're working with a tween or a teenager, it's like working with clay. And then if you're working with like an adult, then it's definitely like plasticine that's quite dried out and requires a lot of water and a lot of movement in order to get that to change. But with repetition, neurons that we say neurons that fire together wire together. So the more you practice certain neural pathways with your child, the more they do certain things, the stronger those neural connections are. They're like root systems of a tree, which connect to other roots, and then they start to communicate, or like a web. And so when we feel like maybe we haven't done our job and our child hasn't had enough of something, the nice thing is we can stop doing the things that aren't helpful for our kids, and we can focus more on the healthier things we can do. And like when they're teenagers, which is really interesting, is any neural circuits that they don't use will get pruned out eventually. So if there's some pieces there that you're not happy with as a parent, if we knock them out when they're younger, the brain will have an opportunity to say, I don't need this anymore, and it'll cut away at those pieces through a process called myelinization. So that's a hopeful part. Here is this really neat graph that shows from Harvard, showing how the brain has its ability to change in responses to experience, and the amount of effort it does require. So you can see that obviously the sooner we can adapt as parents and make more informed choices, the easier it's going to be to make those shifts in neuroplasticity in our children's brains. Here is just a picture that kind of shows the brain in terms of that filling in of that thinking, that prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the thinking brain, the neocortex, right behind your eyes. And you can see how long this takes to fill in. So giving your child some grace, that if you've got a 3-year-old that's throwing a lot of tantrums, this hopefully makes a lot of sense to you. If you have your 7-year-old calling you stupid and they hate you, it's because this part of the brain, this upstairs, Dr. Daniel Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne Bryson will talk about, they call this the upstairs brain. And really, that is the lid that keeps our emotions and our impulses intact. And so we know about the brain is that young children just don't have that same ability. But the good thing is, and Tanya will talk more about this in her part of the presentation, there are things you can do to help build the staircase that connects the body brain and the feeling brain. So the brain stem and the limbic system to start talking more frequently. So it's like building a staircase to that part of the brain that's in charge of emotion regulation, that's in charge of critical thinking and impulse control. So some of this we just have to know takes time with our kids, and we can't rush it. Some kids will develop that thinking brain, that impulse control brain, that emotion regulation brain far sooner than other kids will. I see some kids start as young as 4, even though it's supposed to be 5 to 7. And I've seen some kids it doesn't start till closer to 7 to 9. And those are usually in our highly sensitive children. It's a little bit later. So let's talk now. If we're using Dan and Tina's model, the brain in hand model, I really encourage you to look this up. So if we think of this is your brain, this is your spinal cord, this is your brain stem, your body brain. It's in charge of your central nervous system. This is your emotional brain here in the center. And over top of this is like right to this part here, right behind your eyes, is your thinking brain, your cortical brain. Let's talk about this middle brain, the limbic system. So the emotional brain is very vulnerable when kids are young, and it's very important we have to have this intact, because if this part doesn't finish developing, we can't fully develop this part. Remember I said earlier, it's use dependent and it has to develop from the bottom up. You don't get to jump from developing a brainstem, skipping this part and developing that upstairs brain. If this part is damaged, this part will inevitably be damaged, or it won't grow properly. So this is why emotions and attachment are so vitally important in early childhood, that the more warm, reciprocal relationships kids have where they're very attuned to, this doesn't mean we don't have limits and boundaries. It just means that we ensure attachments come first for kids, not academics. So, and this emotional brain right here in the middle, this part that's in charge of attachment, is easily damaged by stress and trauma. So the part of the brain, the amygdala, which if you were to look at, you've got 2 knuckles here. So if you imagine your emotional brain, you have the amygdala and you have the hippocampus. The amygdala is really the watchdog of your brain, and it works hand in hand with your brainstem to create the stress response, which is fight, flight, freeze, or collapse. And we'll talk about that in a second. Now, the amygdala will release when it feels threatened or doesn't feel safe. And so that can be emotionally not safe or physically not safe. That amygdala releases stress hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline in the body. And too much cortisol, so especially when kids are left alone in their pain, too much cortisol, where that child's left alone to try to soothe themselves, which they don't do very well. They end up numbing out because the soothing part of the brain isn't developed yet. That actually kills the neurons in the next part, or sorry, the next story, the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is really the intellectual mapper and in charge of memory in the brain. So the more stressed our kids are, the poorer they do at remembering things. So we definitely don't want that piece, because that will prevent them from learning. If you don't have memory, you can't learn things. And it also helps filter some sensory information. There's also other parts of the brain that are involved in sensory kind of gating information. This isn't the only part. So you do have, like I said, other parts that do that, but it is involved in that process in that hippocampus. So what we want is that amygdala is the watchdog of our brain. We don't want that amygdala to go off very often in our kids, and it will go off. The problem is it's like a muscle, and the more it goes off, the more the child goes into a stress response. And if they're in a stress response, then they'll have all those toxic chemicals hanging out in their brain, which kill the brain in many different ways, kill those neurons. And that child will be wired for a stress response because that amygdala gets bigger. So it's almost like the amygdala becomes paranoid about its environment. And then you'll have a child who's always looking for the next bad thing to happen. And unfortunately, if that amygdala is too strong, it will make a lot of mistakes and will tell the child things are scary or things are a threat when they aren't really a threat. So if we want that hippocampus that's in charge of long-term memory to be nice and strong, we don't want to poke at that amygdala. So what this means as a parent is we don't want to be the source of fear for our kids. And one of our main jobs as a parent, because that upstairs brain, the thinking brain that is supposed to help with emotion regulation, isn't very well informed, we have to act as that upstairs brain. We are the ones that have to, what we would call, co-regulate our children to ensure that amygdala isn't always firing. Because if it fires, our children are in survival response, and then they have that toxic cortisol constantly flowing through their brain, which then kills a lot of the neural connections in the brain. And it's not that we can prevent our kids from getting scared, but one of the things you can do to keep that amygdala from firing too much is that when your child does get scared, that you are with them in that fear. And then we do that co-regulation, because what's toxic is when kids get scared and they're left to deal with it by themselves, or when the parent is the source of fear for their child. So that's the thing I want you to take the most from that feeling brain is we don't want our kids in a fight flight collapse response, which again we'll go more into in a second, and we don't want to be the source of that alarm going off. Now the thinking brain, remember I told you, it doesn't start really developing until 5 to 7 years of age. This is like the neocortex, the cortical brain, and also called the prefrontal cortex. It's different names, same thing. This piece starts at 5 to 7, doesn't finish till you're close to 30. Just so you know, the emotion regulation centers of your brain, of the neocortex, aren't done developing until you're 32. So that's the newest research on that. So these are kind of the things that we want from our kids, as you've seen here, but it doesn't really start developing till kids are quite a bit older, and it's not really well developed till our late 20s. So we've got to give our kids grace here. We have to be patient with them. And one of the quickest ways we can develop this part of the brain, like the quickest ways, is not to overactivate this part of the brain in a negative way. We want to activate it in a positive way. We want kids to feel safe with us, to be nurtured by us. Hugs, kisses, reassurance, positive experiences about you doing things with them, playing with them. But what we don't want is to activate that amygdala. We don't want to poke at that, because if this keeps getting poked at and kids keep feeling anxious and scared and overwhelmed, especially by us as parents, it stops this from developing, or it kills the neurons that have developed. So when we scream at our kids, if we hit our kids, if we spank our kids, you're literally killing brain cells that are in charge of emotion regulation, the neurons they need to do well at school, that they need for empathy, that they need for critical thinking. So our role as parents is to nurture this part, not to inadvertently kill the neurons pathways that they need to be healthy, resilient adults down the road. So this is why we say that you have to have safety first and growth second, that this is the number one, and you've seen that maybe our other webinars, or if you take one of our courses, you would know that the number one determining factor on whether a child becomes resilient as an adult is having a secure attachment with an adult, just one, in their childhood, in those early years. We need to connect, not and and not go into, when I say connect, not protect, I mean, we want to protect our kids, but we don't want them to go into protection mode where that amygdala gets amped up and activated, where the child says, I have to protect myself all the time, because then again, they don't have access. So that's the other thing to think about. If we look at the brain here and we think of it as like this, remember brainstem, limbic system, thinking brain. If we activate this amygdala, that watchdog of the brain, the part of the brain says, I need to protect. And it also says, am I safe? If the answer is no, the amygdala will go into fight, flight, freeze, collapse. And if it goes into that protection, into protect mode, even if a child has some of the cortical brain figured out and it's filled in, the child will lose access to the thinking brain, which we call flipping, or Dr. Daniel Siegel coined this, flipping our lid, which means the electrical conductivity that connects the neurons that connect that emotional brain and body brain to the upstairs brain lose power. It's like the Wi-Fi is down. And that's why even us as adults, when we get into a place where we're emotional and our amygdala is activated, we make really poor decisions when we are angry or we are scared. We are at the point where our body is just concerned with survival, not our words. It's not concerned about making great choices. It's just saying, keep me safe. And sometimes that emotional brain can make mistakes too. So this is what I was talking about, is when you flip your lid and you lose that connection to the thinking, emotion regulation part of your brain, the logical part of your brain, you go into one of four responses, which we think of it as survival. Is we can fight, which means if we're being attacked by a predator, a saber-tooth tiger back in the day, then we're going to fight. If there's an avalanche, we need to run away, so we go into flight. If freeze might be, I need to look for the nearest exit, but in that interim, I have to scan my environment, so we freeze. And collapse means if something is so painful that I can't tolerate it anymore, whether it's emotionally or physically, my body is actually going to shut down entirely because it's prepared to die, or it's prepared to bear way too much pain. So it's almost, we go into shock. So those are the four default kind of places we go when we feel threatened and under siege, and our brain is like, protect, protect, protect. And that's that amygdala going off. And again, if the amygdala is going off, the brain is not doing what it needs to do to grow that logical part of the brain. Now we need this. This isn't bad, but the child shouldn't be going here all the time or staying in this fight, flight, freeze, collapse response for very long. The idea is this is what we need for survival. But threats shouldn't be all day, every day. They shouldn't last for weeks or months on end, or we're going to see brain damage. So what will happen is we will have comes from polyvagal theory. And this is what I want you to think about when your child feels stress, or when you feel stress. You'll kind of go into a couple different phases here. So what I want you to know is that when your child becomes scared or agitated, when they go into flipping your lid and their amygdala is activated, the first thing kids and people in general are supposed to do is to look towards our attachment figures, look to our friends, look to our peers, look to our tribe through social engagement to stay safe and to co-regulate, which means we want our kids to turn to us when they feel threatened, not away from us. And so often we don't go into fight, flight, freeze, or collapse if we have loved ones around us, or we go there, but we can quickly regulate or co-regulate depending if there's an upstairs brain. So we want kids to view us as safe so they can stay in the green zone more often, because then they can be curious and compassionate, and they can be connected and relaxed, and they can learn. Now, if they can't connect socially, or they're having a hard time connecting socially and they're really, really stressed, they go into hyperarousal, which involves can be anger or rage, panic, anxiety, restless. And what we'll see is the heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, adrenaline, we get oxygen circulation, because when we go into fight flight, we have all the blood flow to our extremities that makes us faster and stronger, so we can run away or fight off a predator. We see the pupils will dilate. We get defensive responses, increase in our muscle tone. And these are all to help survive. And again, and then what happens if we stay in this state for too long? So essentially, something called the anterior cingulate cortex that modulates pain says if we stay in this yellow zone for too long, it's going to start killing brain cells, and it's going to be too much, and it's going to hurt too much, and our brain doesn't wants us to survive, so it goes into something called dissociation, which is the red zone. And often people don't understand the red zone. It's very missed with people because they assume there's only two things that kids experience, either fight, flight. But this collapse response is really what depression is. This is what it looks like to be checked out, to be numbed out, to feel helpless. And it's really because our brain is preparing for death and it doesn't want us to hurt anymore. And unfortunately, when we're in this state, and many of you have experienced depression, know what it's like, it's all your emotions get knocked out. And often you can hardly even feel your body anymore. And this is just the last kind of resort for your brain to feel like it can survive. So we definitely don't want kids going into this part, into the red zone. And so why? So that's why it's so important if we can, to catch them when they get into the yellow zone, and hopefully not be the ones who send them into the yellow zone and the red zone, but just kind of the way through and how this works with kids is those are the defenses, and we want to mitigate. They're going to go into the yellow, especially young kids go into the yellow zone a lot. But if we don't help them, if we don't connect with them, they will start going into the red zone. And when they get into the red zone, we see a lot of negative mental health outcomes long term that are not good. That we're for this. I want you to take my trauma webinar if you want to learn more about what happens there. The other thing we want you to know about, so we know we have these states of protection, and we can't prevent our kids from getting hurt or getting scared, but we don't want to be the source of that. And we want to be the person who brings them back into that green zone if we can, and prevent them from going and staying too long in that upper areas of the curve. Now, the other thing to know about working with our kids and having an understanding is that the brain is lateralized, which means it has two hemispheres, and it's connected by something called the corpus callosum. Now, there's two sides. There is the left and right. Now, the left brain is very logical and linear. It's like the lawyer or the accountant of your brain. It's also in charge of language. So it's very, it loves lists. It likes things to be ordered, but it isn't very holistic. It can kind of get lost in the mix of things because it just likes to see relationships between if different aspects, but doesn't see the whole piece. So it's very detail oriented, but sometimes can miss the overall picture of what's going on. And again, it very much depends on language and logic. Now, our right hemisphere of our brain is all about emotion and empathy and creativity and the body. It's very holistic, so it sees the whole picture. And we should be balanced somewhat between as adults, using our left and right hemisphere. The healthiest adults have a good balance between the two, and we should be able to go back and forth between the two hemispheres. But most adults are more one hemisphere than the other, just like you're more left or right handed. Now, children, on the other hand, tend to be very right brained. That actually the right brain fills in first and then the left second. And it's very, very important, just like we have our bottom up processing and bottom use dependent, we have to nurture that right hemisphere before we nurture the left. And once that right is nice and filled in, we move on to the left hemisphere and we can go from there. So, what does the right need? The right needs connection with the body. The right needs you to be attuned to emotions with your child. The right needs hugs and kisses and empathic statements and validation. And you need to teach your child feelings words and where those emotions hang out in their body, which is often missed by parents. We talk about feeling happy, sad, or scared, but ultimately, emotions actually happen in the body before they happen in our head. We just don't realize that because we're not taught that. So your brainstem is what registers what's going on in the environment first. And then it's the middle brain that interprets what's going on in our body and calls it an emotion and decides if it's threatening or not. So one of the biggest things I would tell you as a caregiver and as a parent is to nurture emotions when kids are very, very young. This will help. Then you're using words, which will also help the left brain kind of come online with that. And this is also very important when we're parenting and children flip their lid, and that amygdala gets activated. Whether it's they didn't get the right cup, it's they're mad at you because they had to put the iPad down, whatever it is that you're getting into, kind of into a power struggle with your child, understand the amygdala is activated, they have flipped their lid, and they are in their right hemisphere. So this is not the time to have a lecture or have a conversation about what's going on. As Dr. Daniel Siegel had said, we need to name it, to tame it. We go to send signals to the part of the brain that's activated, which is the parts of the brain that are activated is the right hemisphere and the limbic system and the body. So it's this together gets activated when we have an emotional experience. The brainstem in relationship to the limbic or emotional brain. So we connect, then redirect. So we can name the emotion our child's experiencing. Just say, yeah, you're really frustrated with me that I took the iPad away. And then we can give a hug. We can connect in other ways. We can give just reassurance with our body, but it's important that we validate. Now, kids might still argue with you; they might not want a hug, but the idea is we're saying to your child, "I see that you're in pain. I'm safe, and I'm going to be here with you." And so that's why we say we're sending signals to that part, is to say, I'm no threat to you right now, and I'm going to help co-regulate you. Because remember, because the lid's split, they don't have a lid to regulate. So we have to be that lid. We have to be that upstairs brain for them. And then the other part here, so we have to connect before we discipline. We never, when a child's lid is flipped and they're in their emotional brain and in their right brain, that is not the time to teach a lesson. We don't discipline until a child is calm, because that involves language and it involves the thinking of the upstairs brain. It involves sophisticated brain processes that when a child's in an emotional state, they can't access that part. They're in survival. So always let the child calm, allow that, calm the part that's overactivated, which is the right brain, allow time for that upstairs brain to come back online, or for at least to deactivate the part that's saying survive, 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 protect, protect, protect. And the other thing that you can do, and this again comes from Dr. Daniel Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne Bryson, is storytelling. That when children experience threat, something scary, something that makes them angry, one of the best things you can do is review the memory of the scary or bad or whatever the threatening thing that happened. You can talk about the details, what happened, talk about where it started, what happened in the middle, and then how it kind of remedied towards the end. Talk about their emotional experience of being in that event, where that emotion hung out in their body, how they felt, and where did they feel that. So for instance, if your child had a lockdown at school, you could talk about what they were doing before the lockdown, what happened during the lockdown, and what happened after the lockdown, and what kind of thoughts did they have during the lockdown, what emotions did they experience during the lockdown, where did they feel those emotions in their body. And this power of storytelling not only gets the right and the left brain online at the same time, it also circumvents trauma in the brain from something it's called fragmentation of memory, which has to do with the trauma response. And fragmentation is never good. So that is just one way we can work with lateralization in order to, and storytelling is just one of the many ways we can do this. But what I wanted to give you as a takeaway from this. I thought that was the last one. One more thing, and then Tanya is going to take over here. Memory is another thing that often we've kind of touched on, but I want you also to know there's two types of memory kids have, and it really comes from two places. So remember when we talked about our emotional brain, we have the amygdala and we have the hippocampus. The hippocampus is what's called explicit memory or autobiographical memory. The implicit memory system has to do with the body. Your body remembers doing something like riding a bike. And you cannot remember something happening, but your body knows how to still do it, even if you don't have a lot of memories of doing it. Like riding a bike, you cannot have a lot of memories of learning how to do that, yet you can get on a bike when you're 40 after not riding a bike for 15 years and still do it. That is an implicit memory at work. And implicit memory, we now know, happens from in utero. So you have implicit memory from the time you're in your mother's womb. It's cellular memory. So implicit memory, and this is the biggest takeaway I want you to have from this, is that just now the explicit memory forms at about 5 onwards, comes from the hippocampus. But just because your child won't remembering something happening, like the story of it happening, doesn't mean the child's body won't remember it happening. This is why we're a huge advocate of not letting kids cry it out. Will the child remember the story of you not coming into the room while they cried for 20 minutes? No, they won't. But their body, we know the body carries trauma and it carries positive and negative emotions. So you can have something horrible happen to you and still your body will react to certain stimulus even if you don't remember it. So the important thing is it doesn't give us as excuse as parents to only get our kind of poop in a group once our kids start remembering things, which is after 5. Actually, your child's body is going to be even the most sensitive to memory before the age of 5. So we just don't want to forget it's just a different type of memory. They still remember, it's kept in the body. And your child will remember whether you were someone who soothed them or rejected them. They might not remember you being safe per se instances, but they remember what it was like to feel safe with you. So I'm hoping that helps. And that might really encourage some of you who always picked your kids up, who gave your kids comfort, who did lots of eye contact and lots of snuggles. No, will they remember that? Absolutely not from when they were for 2 or 1, but their body does remember that. And that's very, very important in terms of their long-term psychological, emotional, and physical development. So now I'm going to hand this presentation off to Tanya, and then you will hear from me at the end of the presentation.
Hi, I'm Tanya Johnson. I am one of the co-founders of the Institute of Child Psychology and a registered psychologist. Tammy has just taken me through the first half of our presentation, and I'm so excited to continue with looking at brain builders. So where do we start? We start with the magnificent neurons. Neurons are incredible. Really, we have as many neurons in our brain, in adult brains, as there are stars in the Milky Way. About 100 billion in the adult brain. It's not the neurons that are important though. It's the connections between the neurons. So each one of those neurons make about 1,000 to 10,000 contacts with other neurons. Just very basically, if we have a look at the picture over here, we will see those long threads. Those are dendrites. So dendrites collect incoming information from other cells so that this incoming information comes in, this message travels down to that cell body. The cell body is where energy is generated and where DNA is stored. So it travels down to that cell body, and then it travels to the end, to the axons. The axons release that message out into a tiny little gap. You'll see in the picture that release happening. It releases into a tiny gap called a synapse. That release then activates the next neuron in the pathway. So it's a lock and key system. So only certain neurons activate other neurons. So it then activates the next neuron, and these little messages are passed along. This is really how our brain, one part communicates with another, how the brain communicates with the body, and also how our brain communicates with the external world. It really is incredible. So we have these neurons communicating with one another through these chemical and electrical signals. What we know about the brain is the parts of the brain that we focus on will grow. So repeated experiences from our environment help to shape the brain. This is where parenting really comes in. The types of experiences that we put in front of our children will shape what happens to them neurologically. So for example, in my own family, my sister loves doing puzzles. So her children may spend a lot of time working on puzzles, whereas my family, we tend to do a lot of outdoorsy things, so lots of skiing, lots of sledding. So again, very often the parental interest, without even realizing it, tends to shape what happens for the children. Research shows us that, for example, when animals are rewarded for noticing sound, that the auditory part of their brain is much bigger. Taxi drivers, this was an amazing study. Taxi drivers who are using maps every day, who looked at maps to figure out where to take their clients, that their hippocampus was much bigger because the hippocampus is actually responsible for spatial awareness. What was amazing is that when those taxi drivers, later retired, that part of the hippocampus actually shrunk. That saying, use it or lose it. This is really how states become traits. So, for example, if we respond to something in a similar way every single time, so every time our child comes home and we huff because they haven't brought home the correct homework, or we sigh loudly, eventually that dissatisfaction, if it's practiced again and again and again, will become an automatic way to responding to our world. And it's the same with our kiddos. This is how practice becomes skill. So think about a child who's learning how to read for the first time, how difficult it is to put those letters again together to make the right sounds. And in time, that practice becomes skill, and they get faster and faster and faster. That myelin sheath on the dendrite is working quicker and quicker and quicker. And eventually we read without even thinking about it. Another really important thing to know is that neurons that fire together wire together. So let's think about a child who goes to school and they have a very positive experience. They feel loved and connected at school. Eventually, we're going to wire education and positivity together. The opposite, unfortunately, is true too. In our parenting, if we have a child who comes to us with a problem and we automatically respond with a lecture or harsh punishment, that child will come to connect distress, their own distress, with a heavy parental reaction. Eventually, if that's repeated again and again and again, that will become the connection. Conversely, if we have a child who comes to us with a problem, and this is from when they're really little, so if they're 3 and they come to us with a problem, and we're able to be attuned, warm, connected, they'll start to connect that when I'm struggling, mom or dad or my caregiver is a safe place. And if they can do that at 3, they're more likely to do that at 13 and more likely to then do that at 23. Next topic that we're going to be looking at is mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are a really big topic, but I think the easiest way to explain them is if you've ever been with a friend and your friend is telling you a story and you start to cry as she is crying, those are your mirror neurons that are firing. It's the same as if we're with a friend and we start laughing, or we're watching a sports team and we jump up and cheer with everybody else. Those are all examples of our mirror neurons firing. Basically, mirror neurons fire when we see somebody perform an action or experience something that we have experienced in the past. We do it very naturally with little ones. So think about a baby that's in your arm. They coo, we coo back at them. They giggle, we giggle. They pull back, we pull back. We mirror their facial expressions. We tend to lose it as our kids get a little bit older. But really, if we're able to keep on mirroring our children, we're giving them an incredible gift. Mirror neurons form the basis of empathy, connection, social, and emotional learning. Jennifer Kolari has a beautiful technique called the CALM method. So this is how she suggests you do it. But children are really struggling with something. First, we connect with them. So we make sure we are fully present, that they feel safe with us. Perhaps we sit down, perhaps we give them hot chocolate, but we let them know that we are really there with them. Then we attune to them. So that attunement is us coming in with our body matching their body, our voice, our facial expression matching theirs. It might need to be more controlled if they're hysterical, just to help ground them a little bit. But we're fully attuned. And then we listen. It's that active listening. We don't want to do it from far away, as we sometimes hear psychologists do things like, oh, it sounds as if you are. We don't want to be too distant. We want to come right in there with them and say, oh, that was a really tough day. Right here, I know you really wanted another cookie and you're so mad that your brother finished the cookies. So we really listen. And then if we've got that right, the connect, the attunement, the listening, that's when the mirroring happens. And we'll see that our child really just comes right down. Very often we'll see tears. We'll see that the situation will be de-escalated. and then later we can come in with solutions. But unfortunately, as parents, we often jump in way too quickly without truly mirroring our children. Neurotransmitters. So you'll remember when we were talking about those incredible neurons, that our neurotransmitters are those chemical messages that pass messages from neuron to neuron. They can also pass messages from neuron to muscle. We're going to talk about just a few of the most important neurotransmitters. Dopamine. So dopamine is what we feel when we do something that makes us feel good. So for some people, it might be shopping. We go shopping, we buy what we've wanted for a long time, and we feel that surge. Others, it might be at the casino. They get a surge when they win. For some people, it might be perhaps it's being on Facebook and you're getting those notifications that are coming all the time. Perhaps it's a video game. Each time you kill an opponent, you also have those little bursts of dopamine. This is also how addiction happens, because over time, those dopaminergic pathways become somewhat overused, and we have to engage in an activity more and more and more in higher dosages to get the same response. Facebook, Instagram, all of those social media outlets that give us cues or notifications are really relying on those little surges of dopamine, because each time we feel it, we keep scrolling so that we can have yet another surge of dopamine. There's also wonderful natural ways to get dopamine. So for example, when we go sledding, we have to do all of that hard work first. We have to climb up the hill, and then we have the dopamine surge as we rush down. Unfortunately, one of the things that we're seeing is because we've become lazier at getting our dopamine, there's often, unfortunately, less of a pull to go outside and get our dopamine in different ways. So when our dopamine levels are healthy, we feel alert, we feel motivated, we feel focused. When our dopamine levels are low, we can feel sleepy, distracted, bored, restless, not really motivated. It can be hard to move our bodies. We can feel quite sluggish. So what are some of the natural ways that we can increase dopamine? Children are fantastic. They're just a really natural dopaminergic high. So whether we are play fighting, so a bit of roughhousing, whether we are play fighting, whether we are just engaged on the floor with them in non-directed play, whether we're cuddling, they can really be incredibly powerful moments in activating that reward system in the brain. There are some foods that can help too, particularly proteins, probiotics, and then less saturated fats. Exercise is a wonderful way to increase dopamine in a healthy way. Sleep is huge. I always say, so often we'll have clients come into the office, and there's basic fundamental building blocks that if they're not in place, it's very hard to deal with the struggles that you might be dealing with if we don't have those fundamental building blocks in place. So exercise, sleep, music can also give us those dopamine surges. Meditation, and then being outside, both in the summer and in the winter time. Serotonin, many of us are familiar with serotonin. Serotonin really is a mood stabilizer, so it helps to stabilize our mood. When our serotonin levels are just right, we'll feel greater feelings of well-being and happiness. We'll have greater memory, we'll be able to sleep better, we'll be able to eat better, and our digestion tends to work better. When our serotonin is low, we're at a higher risk for depression, anxiety, for having sleep issues, digestive issues, impulsivity issues, and our appetite may be off. So if we want to increase it, some of the things are similar to what we saw with dopamine. Exercise, being outside, massage has been shown to help increase serotonin. Certain supplements, so pure tryptophan, probiotics, St. John's wort are examples of those. And although we can't get serotonin directly from food, we can get it from tryptophan. So this tryptophan is an amino acid that is converted to serotonin in the brain. So some foods high in tryptophan, we just finished off Thanksgiving here in Canada. So it might be turkey, salmon, nuts, seeds, dairy, and also oats. Cortisol. We all are going to go through stressful times in our life. We are all going to have surges of cortisol. Cortisol is that stress hormone. So we're all going to have those surges of cortisol. When stress is ongoing, cortisol becomes toxic for the brain. We often refer to it as being poisonous to the brain. And some of the things that we see are really, really significant. So we might see volume loss in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex, Tammy spoke about this earlier, is absolutely essential for emotional regulation, executive functioning, rational thought, reflexive thinking, and planning. We might see reduced integrity of the anterior cingulate cortex. Really what this area is for is it's for empathy, impulse control, emotion, decision-making, insight. There may be impairment of the corpus callosum. So really this is our communication. The corpus callosum allows the right and the left hemispheres of the brain to communicate with one another. And you'll know from earlier on in the presentation how important this is. We may also see volume loss in the hippocampus. The hippocampus is so incredibly important for memory, for processing, and also for the mediation of sensory information. So we just looked at dopamine, serotonin, and cortisol. We really want to make sure that we're working at optimal levels. Have a look back at what we've just spoke about and look at where you may be able to increase certain factors within your lifestyle to ensure that our stress is down and that our dopamine and our serotonin are at healthy levels. Again, there's lots of just small changes we can make in our lifestyle to create bigger changes when it comes to mental health. We're going to look at some ways to help grow those big, beautiful brains. There's incredible work coming out on mindfulness. Dr. Daniel Siegel is incredible. He is one of our leaders in this area. He has a number of different books on mindfulness, both for adults and also on how to integrate it into family life. What does mindfulness really do? Again, incredible studies coming out at the moment. We're seeing that it helps to build emotion regulation. It helps to build that connection between body and mind. It increases cognitive flexibility, so our ability to consider different perspectives, problem solve, look critically at different things that we're working on. It increases empathy, insight, and also our ability to really have a deep sense of morality and to stand by it. So think about it, when we can quieten the mind, it's much easier to be rooted to our values and to act on those values. Play is also incredible for the brain. It really does help develop that brain muscle. Play has been shown to increase functioning in that prefrontal cortex, which is where we want it. When that prefrontal cortex is firing beautifully, what we see is that children are able to regulate their emotions, they're able to plan ahead more, they're able to problem solve, they're also able to work through their fears. Play therapy relies a lot on that ability to work through fears through the language of play. Really what we're seeing is that play activates that entire neocortex. It's also been shown, play's also been shown to improve memory, attention span, and language development. It really helps children to get ready for school because they're playing and preparing so many different skills through play. So it enhances that learning readiness and also increases those problem-solving skills. Along with this, they are working, as I said, they're working on different skills, so it helps to nurture mastery. Play is also amazing. So when children don't play or they have limited play or they're not used to being outside on play structures or trying to navigate how to get up a tree, we see that they don't have the same small inoculations to stress. When children are figuring out how to get up that tree, when they're doing the monkey bars, when they're trying to figure out whose turn is next, they have small little jolts of stress. And what the research is showing us is that these small little natural jolts of stress that they don't even realize are there eventually helps them to build resiliency towards larger stresses in their life. And then a final quote here, the function of play is to build pro-social brains that know how to interact with others in positive ways. There's that social emotional learning that we were discussing earlier. Okay, we've looked at play, we've looked at mindfulness, and now we're going to look at movement. Children tend to understand their world through a body-based experience. And unfortunately, many of our children are not moving enough and not hitting those developmental milestones, which include emotional and social milestones. Think about when your child comes home from school and they've been at their desk all day and then they lie on the sofa. What sort of behaviors do you see? It may be very similar to what we've seen in rats. So when rats are not allowed to play with one another, what we see is that they become more aggressive. So we reduce their amount of rough and tumble play, and what do we see increase? We see hyper playfulness increase, and we also see impulsivity increase. Our children need to be able to move their bodies to work through different emotional issues and to help restore equilibrium to their body. Movement has been shown to release stress hormones, to stimulate endorphins, those feel-good hormones, and also oxytocin. We'll talk about oxytocin in a minute. BDNF. BDNF stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor, sometimes referred to as brain fertilizer. Active play, so that rough and tumble play, active play actually helps to stimulate some of that brain fertilizer in the amygdala, so that's where our emotions are processed, and also in the prefrontal cortex, where those executive decisions are processed. So play is really important. Movement, active movement, is really important for those big, beautiful brains. Touch and attunement. So incredibly important. We spoke about attunement with those mirror neurons. So we know that those early tactile experiences influence an infant's immunological response, their growth rate, and also their weight gain. When touch is safe, it's appropriate, it's attuned, it's warm, it's also been shown to increase sensory motor performance, learning, responsivity, and also visual recognition. Touch is an incredibly critical component of both healthy attachments and emotion regulation. What touch does when it's safe and warm and attuned is that it helps to buffer the child from excessive surges of emotion. So we come in as an adult and we hold them when they're crying, or we come close and we hold their hands, and it helps to bring that stress response down. When we bring that stress response down, the body can focus on what it needs to focus on. And what really happens is we see this beautiful genetic unfolding, and we see optimal brain development taking place. Really, the important work of childhood is taking place. As adults, we've stepped in, we've helped to bring stress down, we're attuned, we've created a safe environment for a child, and then their body can engage in the work that it needs to engage in. We do this in different ways, obviously, as our children get older, but we can hold those same safe environments in different ways. When we hold a baby and that attunement occurs, what we see is that wash of oxytocin. Oxytocin is incredible. It's our bonding chemical. It's what helps people to stay connected. It's what helps a baby to stay connected to a mama to stay connected to a baby. Oxytocin happens between couples when we share those warm hugs. It happens when we hold our children's hands. Really, it's the bonding chemical. Attunement happens through not only touch, but again, through our presence, through our use of voice, through our different expressions, and also through the gestures that we use. In this slide, we're going to look at a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. This is based on the work of Carol Dweck. This graph was created by Nigel Holmes. We can tell from the time a child is very young whether they are from a fixed mindset home or a growth mindset home. Children from a fixed mindset home tend to believe that intelligence is static, that skills are static. So I am good at math, I am not good at math. I am a good athlete, I am not a good athlete. Really, in our homes, we're conveying to our children on a daily basis whether we are from a fixed mindset or a growth mindset, not only by the things we say directly to them, but by the things that we say about ourselves. So when we believe that intelligence is static or skills are static, it leads to a desire to look smart. And so what we end up doing is we avoid challenges because we want to look smart at all costs. So we avoid challenges. We don't try very hard. The moment there's an obstacle and it's going to pierce our view that we are smart at something or we're not, what we end up doing is we just avoid that obstacle in case it blows our worldview. We see effort as fruitless or worse, no point. I might as well not learn at math because I'm not good at math. We avoid criticism. We are threatened by the success of others. And as a result, what we see is that although children initially might do really well, they end up plateauing. So there really is a deterministic view of the world. What we want for our children is a growth mindset, that skills can be developed, that intelligence can be developed. When our children are from a growth mindset, it leads to desire to learn and therefore a tendency to embrace challenges, to persist in the face of setbacks, to see effort as a path to mastery, to really learn from criticism, and then to find lessons and inspirations in the success of others. And as a result, what we see is that even though those kids might be slower initially, they keep on learning across the lifespan. So in a growth mindset, we'll hear things like, oh, I can see how much effort you put into that art. Or, you must be so proud of yourself. I've watched you shooting that hockey puck again and again and again. Oh, you spent a lot of time on that. I can see you're really understanding the concept. It's always about the journey. It's not about that final grade. Remember, we can't always control that final grade, but we can control how much effort we put in. And just a reminder again, that this starts in our homes from a very, very, very young age. So again, if we want to grow those big, beautiful brains, ask yourself, are we creating a fixed mindset home or classroom, or are we creating a growth mindset home or classroom? And to finish off here, the best way to grow those big, beautiful brains in our children is to be connected, present, warm, to laugh with them, and to really look at your own life and ask, what needs to change in the environment so that our household, our classroom, can nurture the very best of each individual within those environments. Every day we wake up, we're contributing towards growing those big, beautiful brains. Thank you so much. We've really enjoyed our time with you.
Thank you so much for staying the whole way through our webinar. We sincerely hope you took something valuable from your time today. We know how busy everyone is. And we also know how important it is to you to foster positive mental health outcomes in your child or the children that you work with. Being a parent is hard. Anybody who is taking care of kids, and we all need a village, and many of us can't access that village in person. So the Institute has got your back. Today, I'm here to talk to you about an opportunity that we wanted to give you as a thank you. Today, we are offering a 7-day free trial to our membership program. And this is where you can take any course that the Institute of Child Psychology offers for a monthly fee if you choose to subscribe. It's a very comprehensive program that we have developed to make mental health information affordable, accessible, and digestible for people. We feel that often this information can be overwhelming for those who want to learn how to help a child who is struggling with their mental health. And so we have developed a comprehensive library of courses to help parents and professionals navigate these tricky situations. With our membership, you have access to all of our courses. We have nearly 30 courses. Actually, I think we're now over 30 courses available in our library from expert psychologists and instructors from around the world. We offer a certification program, which I will talk about momentarily. All our courses are self-paced. You can get continuing education certificates at the end of each course that you take. It is meant to be affordable. It's only $15.99 a month after your 1 week free subscription. There are resources and workbooks. We have so many different courses that we can offer you, from managing parental stress to understanding sensitive children, classroom mental health, working with trauma and depression, navigating technology, fostering emotion regulation, dealing with substance abuse, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, helping children with grief and loss, even a program we've developed called Therapeutic Play, compassionate discipline, helping kids who are struggling with divorce and separation. The list goes actually on and on. But what we can tell you is this program also allows you not only to learn and to develop competencies in children's mental health strategies, because all of our courses are a balance between theory and research, and then executable, easy to understand techniques that you can start implementing in your home or your classroom or your clinical practice immediately. You also have the ability to certify with us, and this is for professional development. It allows you to showcase your competencies in the area of children's mental health, which it costs you nothing to do if you are a member with our program, and just requires you to do a certain amount of courses, complete a final essay at the end, and ensure you're doing all of your quizzes and evaluations at the end of each course. So that is another bonus to receiving your certification through the Institute of Child Psychology. So we're hoping you will take one of our courses, try the free trial, see if our courses are going to help you and help you navigate the landmine that can be children's mental health, or just being a parent in general. We're here to help you succeed. We're here to be your village. And so we're hoping you can give us a try and just see if our courses will be able to help you, as they have helped thousands of people. Also, as a gift, maybe you don't want to be a member, but you're looking to just maybe take one of our courses. If you check your email, you will receive a discount code that can be used towards any of our pre-recorded courses for 30%. So you can just, again, check your email for that after this webinar is complete. You will also be able to watch this webinar over again. So just wanted to give a shout out and a thanks to all of you who tuned in today for our webinar. The Institute will continue to develop these free resources for professionals and parents and caregivers to help our children develop resiliency, thrive, and heal. Thank you so much. We are so excited to announce our membership program with the Institute of Child Psychology. With your membership, you will have access to all of our courses, designed with input from a variety of professionals who are specialists in their field.
Included in your monthly membership is the opportunity to pursue our certification program. This credential is designed for individuals who are wishing to receive formal certification from the Institute for continuing ed, employment purposes, and personal development. With this certification, you're demonstrating knowledge in the areas of introductory child psychology, essentials of interpersonal neurobiology, attachment-based interventions, emotional regulation in children, and evidence-based parenting practices. Our members also receive 40% off private parenting and professional consults, and 10% off all live courses and conferences. All of our courses come with individual certificates, email access to instructors, and downloadable workbooks. The Institute is hard at work in developing new content and will be constantly updating our online portal. We have made the executive decision to make this membership portal accessible and affordable for all families. To see what we mean, please join us in a 7-day free trial. It takes a village to raise a child, and we want to be a part of your village.